Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Today's episode is called The Gray Alien Boy. This is the true story of one woman's lifelong experiences with UFOs, ETs, and quite a bit of high strangeness. Her name is Janet. That is her real name, though she has requested anonymity. And yes, she's had lifelong encounters with UFOs and extraterrestrials. But it was an incredibly unusual encounter when she was only 10 years old that really changed her life forever. Since then, she's had a number of face-to-face encounters with humanoids, quite a few sightings, some missing time encounters, and at least 3 onboard UFO encounters. So yes, some very intense UFO ET experiences. But like most UFO contactees, she's also experienced a lifetime of paranormal and psychic events. Quite a few, in fact. She's had ghostly encounters, a really amazing angelic encounter, a near-death experience, quite a few premonitions, out-of-body experiences, some experiences with mediumship, and more. Her story is told in my book, Humanoids and High Strangeness, 20 True UFO Encounters. I've had to summarize her experiences here because, yes, they are very extensive. So if you want to hear the whole story, check the book out. I think you'll find it very interesting. But I'm going to start with Janet's experience at age 10. This is one of the most unusual UFO encounters I've ever heard. It's truly unique. I've never heard anything quite like it. But it's such an amazing encounter, and this is really how it all began for her. She had an encounter during the daytime with what she calls the monster boy. That's what she called it at the time. Later, she realized that this was probably a gray alien ET. The year was 1969. It was a hot summer day in Tarzana, California, as 10-year-old Janet decided to spend the day like she usually did, riding her bicycle around with the neighborhood kids. Her father was somewhat abusive, and because of this, she learned long ago to just stay out of the house as much as possible. So she rode her bicycle over to the home of her best friend Tammy. That is a pseudonym. Unfortunately, on this particular afternoon, Tammy wasn't there. But her brother was, along with a few other boys, so they all decided to go riding on their bicycles. They all lived along Wells Drive, you can see it here, which at that time wasn't very busy. It was a great place for kids to go bike riding. And they would drive back and forth just exploring the neighborhood. On that summer day, while riding around aimlessly and a little bored, Janet was the first to notice a strange dark object of some kind hanging in the air suspended over the tops of a grove of eucalyptus trees located at the top of a long, steep driveway on Wells Drive. You can see it here. Now this object floated there in perfect silence, and Janet shouted out and pointed, "Look, you guys, look up there. What's that?" One of the kids said, "Weird, I don't know." Janet said, "Well, let's get closer and see what it is. Come on, hurry, let's go." So being so young, none of them had really heard of UFOs, but they could see that this was a strange flying object of some kind. Amazed and curious, they pedaled hard as they could and then ended up running with their bikes up to the top of this very long driveway. And at the top of the driveway there was a large, flat, vacant lot. It was undeveloped. Was surrounded by a thick grove of unkempt eucalyptus trees. Now the object they had seen hovering above the trees was no longer there, it was just gone, and as they had only caught a momentary glimpse of it, they kind of just forgot about it and continued to play. So now they're at the top of this driveway. They decided it would be a fun downhill slope, so they began to race each other down the driveway and allow the momentum to carry them down the street. And this turned out to be great fun. So they turned around and pushed their bikes back up this driveway for another pedal-free ride down. After a few more times of doing this, everyone decided it was time to take a break and return to Tammy's house, rest, eat some snacks, and watch TV. Now for some reason, Janet's not sure why, she decided to take one more trip up this driveway by herself. It had been so much fun that she wanted to do it one more time and maybe get enough momentum that she could speed up past her friends and beat them all back to Tammy's house. This would be a decision that would have profound consequences for the rest of Janet's life. So again, this driveway was quite steep, about 100 feet long, and Janet was pretty tired already from the repeated trips up this driveway. So by the time she pushed her bike to the top of this driveway, she was a little bit out of breath. She was resting and getting ready to go down the driveway one last time, and this is when she noticed a young boy emerge from the grove of eucalyptus trees. She could see immediately that he was riding a bike and heading directly towards her, and her first thought was, "Who is that kid?" She already spent most of her time outside, she knew all the kids in the neighborhood, so she decided, "I'll just wait here and see, and maybe we'll have another new friend to ride bikes with." So as this boy slowly approached, Janet noticed several things simultaneously. And the first was that this boy was having a very difficult time riding his bike. As Janet says, he was quite a ways away, maybe 80 yards from me. He was trying to negotiate this wobbling bike, and he can't. It was very difficult for him. All the while he was looking straight at me and trying to keep his balance. It was really awkward, and he had a really very difficult time. He was very shaky on the bike. It seemed he had never ridden a bike before. So as this boy approached, Janet could now see why the boy was having such a hard time with his bicycle. He had extremely long fingers that seemed to have trouble gripping the handlebars, and he was also barefoot. He had very weird feet that didn't seem to fit the pedals. As Janet says, he was doing everything he could to ride that bike towards me. As he got closer, I was mentally taking note that something was wrong with his hands and feet. He had really long fingers, long and spindly, and his feet were so long, he was having a hard time pedaling. He had very long, thin feet. He couldn't ride that bike very well. He just had no idea what he was doing. So as he came even closer, Janet could see by his clothes that he was a boy. He was wearing a red, long-sleeved, button-down Pendleton shirt with a plaid pattern and blue jeans, but he negotiated his bike so poorly that it took him nearly a full minute to approach Janet. She could see it was a nice bike, dark-colored. It had a fancy banana seat and a high sissy bar in back. And as Janet says, "So he's coming closer and I'm taking it in. I'm waiting for some greeting like, 'Hi.' And the next thing I knew, he stopped the bike right in front of me. He put his foot with those long toes on the ground to balance himself and looked right at me while I was looking right back at him. Everything happened so fast, in a split second. My brain was assessing what I was seeing, and all of a sudden I can't believe what's wrong. He had a stunning and striking appearance I had never seen before, and I was trying to make sense of it all and take it all in. So stunned by this boy's strange appearance, she wondered if he was some kind of freak or monster, or perhaps maybe had some sort of disability. Janet's family were close friends with another family whose child had suffered severe oxygen deprivation in the womb, leaving him severely handicapped, and her mind immediately flashed back to her friend as she tried to make sense of what was going on. Could this boy perhaps be suffering from some sort of similar disability? But as Janet says, he had a very long, thin neck. His head was really large, very round. His head size was huge, like a teardrop, but rounded more at the forehead and above. And his eyes, those eyes were so dark and so flat. They wrapped around a little to the side of his head. There was no pupil. It was like you were looking into a flat black. They were very large and almond-shaped, taking up most of its face. He had a grayish-white head and face. It was very odd. He had no nose, just 2 holes, and he had this teeny tiny little mouth. I realized something was very wrong. She could see that his body was very thin. His wrists and ankles looked almost stick-like and were way too long. Now Janet's still straddling her bike. This boy is no more than 2 feet away from her, also still on his bike. He stared directly into her eyes, which she said seemed to almost bore into the center of her mind. She did notice that the boy had the illusion of hair, but it definitely wasn't hair, just more like a shadowed area which came almost to a sort of widow's peak, like Eddie Munster on the Munsters. She did see that this being, this boy, had only 4 fingers, each of which were at least twice as long as a normal person's. His forehead was overly large, his chin came down to a rounded point, and his skin was very pale and incredibly smooth, but it was his eyes that impressed her the most. They were far too large and had a kind of a flat blackness that reminded her of dry, resinous tar. Not once did she see him blink. She saw no eyelids at all, and at this point Janet realized that this strange boy in front of her could not be human. There was no way. No normal person looked like this. She wanted to turn and run, but now found that she was unable to move. She was literally petrified, frozen in place. And this was very scary for her, and she immediately started to panic. As Janet says, I could not move or speak or even make a sound. It was like the awareness of my body was taken away, like I was out of my body and had no control to move anything at all. I could think clearly, but I was literally stuck in time. It was a very weird feeling. I realized I was in danger, I needed to get away, and I could not. I could not move. All the while he was looking at my face. He was face to face with me, looking right at me. He never looked away, never blinked, and had a deadpan expression and what seemed like a curious look while staring at me. My thoughts flooded in to make sense of what I was seeing. But the weird physical deformations were not like anything I had seen before. Janet could hardly believe what happened next. As she says, he calmly and slowly raised his hand and put his hand and fingers up on my left shoulder. The boy then said calmly, "Don't be afraid." Now this wasn't verbal. This was echoing inside her head. And as Janet says, I remember thinking to myself, don't be afraid of what? That really scared me because the only time you tell someone not to be afraid is when they're going to be afraid. What was going on? Like, what do you mean, don't be afraid? Apparently I need to be afraid. At that moment, the world around Janet seemed to be completely forgotten. It was just her and the boy. She saw that his hands, unlike his face, were a little bit wrinkled. She could feel the light pressure of his fingers on her shoulder. And she thought to herself, why? Why did I have to go back up the driveway? Why couldn't I have just gone home with the other kids? This alien-looking boy continued to stare into her eyes, and as she says, he just looked right at me. I could not help but look at his eyes. She sensed no emotion coming from him, and this really unnerved her. So there's Janet face to face with this little monster boy, this gray alien boy. But at that time, never having heard of gray ETs, she did not interpret it that way. She did not know how to interpret it. It was a very scary encounter for her. She had never felt this kind of fear before, and she blacked out. That's the last thing she remembers. She remembers waking up, standing next to her bike, and this ET was gone. What's really interesting about this encounter is I suspect, and I'm speculating here, but I suspect that this gray ET, dressed up in human clothes, this button-down shirt and blue jeans, and riding a bicycle, to reduce the fear factor, to sort of provide an image that perhaps a little girl might be more comfortable with. This kind of backfired. It really freaked Janet out, understandably, I think. So now that she woke up, this little monster boy is gone. She raced down the driveway as fast as she could, really scared, wanting to warn everyone else about this strange being she had encountered. Now, at the time, she estimated that maybe this encounter lasted 5 minutes, but she was about to discover that she had in fact had missing time, and at least an hour had passed, if not more. Janet was more frightened than she had ever been in her young life, so she picked up her bike and just fled. She rode as fast as she could down the hill so she could warn the other kids about this monster boy. She soon reached the house. She saw all the other bikes lying on the ground outside. She leapt off her bike, rushed inside, and to her confusion, all the kids were relaxing on the couch and the floor, sitting in front of the television, eating snacks and watching cartoons. And she screamed out, you guys, you're not going to believe what happened." And they said, "Where have you been?" And she's like, "What do you mean? I was just up the driveway." And they said, "Well, we thought you went home." She's like, "No, what? I just saw you guys. Did you see the freak boy?" And they looked at her like she was crazy and said, "No, you've been gone for hours. Stop trying to scare us." So this stunned Janet. She didn't know what to think. Confusion swept over her. How could it be so late? Where had all the time gone? It was at that moment that Tammy's mother came home. Janet felt a surge of relief. There was an adult she could talk to and warn them about the strange creature she had seen. So Tammy's mother walks in and Janet shouts out, "There's a monster boy. There's something really scary going on up the street. We have to call the police and get help. We're all in danger." Tammy's mother was not impressed, looked at her with a disapproving expression and said, "Oh, you're just making up stories again." So this upset Janet. She recalled an earlier strange incident 1 year before when she had seen another strange humanoid. Nobody had believed her then either. They had accused her of lying, but she hadn't lied then and she wasn't lying now. And she protested. She said, "No, you've really got to listen. It's not safe. You've got to listen to me. You've got to believe me." This just made Tammy's mother angry, and she said, "Stop making up stories. Get out of the house and go home and stop making stories. If you keep making up stories, you won't be allowed to come over anymore. You won't be allowed to play with the others." So Janet was understandably devastated. She was still very scared, not only for herself, but all the other kids. And the last thing she wanted to do was be alone, but she really had no choice. And as Janet says, "I left and rode my bike home as fast as my legs could go. I was crying all the way, trying to make sense of everything, and I had to ride past that driveway. And I thought, what if it happens again and he gets me? I was so terrified. I could barely compose myself. I was so scared." So going past that driveway in such fear was almost more than she could handle, but she did it. She ran inside, told her mother. Her mother only half listened, and as soon as she heard these unusual details, she immediately dismissed Janet's account and said, "You have a big imagination. Quit making up stories." And Janet said, "I'm not. You've got to believe me." And her mother didn't. She said, "I don't want to hear it." Janet was crushed by this. She felt totally defeated. As Janet says, "This was a major life-altering thing that happened to me. And then I got a double whammy. I tried to tell and get help, even though I was terrified to tell. I was not believed. I was told not to lie and that my imagination had taken over. It was devastating. But what could I do? So in solitude, I was left to have to decide how to feel about myself and the memory no one cared to hear about. I knew it all sounded so crazy, but it all really happened to me, and I was left still feeling worried about everyone's safety." So at this point, Janet realized she felt sick to her stomach. She was nauseous. She had a stomach ache. It was a strange feeling because she almost never got sick. She was unusually strong and athletic, very agile. She was a tough kid. She knew it. But now she felt physically ill. So her mother told her to go to bed, which she did. As you can imagine, that was an extremely traumatic event for Janet. Not only did she have a face-to-face encounter with a humanoid that she simply could not understand, did not know what it was, although it was obvious to her that this being was not human. So that alone is traumatic enough. But then to have to go through the whole experience of being disbelieved and even ridiculed, kind of a double whammy. And I do see this with a lot of contactees, especially as children. They have an encounter, they try to tell their parents, their friends, and they're not believed. So this caused Janet to really clam up and keep silent about her encounters. It affected her profoundly. And in fact, following this incident with the quote, "monster boy," she absolutely avoided that driveway at all costs, which wasn't easy because she kind of had to go by it daily. And instead, she would literally take a mile-long detour just so she didn't have to go anywhere near that driveway. That's how profoundly it affected her. Even when they drove by, she'd duck down in the car seat and wouldn't look at it. So you can see that this was a very, very scary experience for her. And it really started to make her look back on her life, because previously, 1 year earlier, she had another encounter with a humanoid, which at the time she didn't understand as well. Tried to tell adults. Again, she was not believed. She was accused of making it up, and she thought perhaps she did. Perhaps she had imagined the whole thing. But now in hindsight, she doesn't think she did. This was another very unusual event that marked the beginning of a lifelong experience with ETs. But this earlier humanoid encounter involved a figure like a man in black. It was 1 year earlier in 1968, and at that time Janet's only real friend was Tammy. So to escape her own abusive household, Janet spent a lot of her time at Tammy's house or outside. Today they were playing in the bushes and building forts, and this is when she thought she saw a very weird looking man, kind of a black hat and a long black trench coat, staring at them. Now Tammy didn't notice this figure, and afterward even Janet herself wasn't entirely sure about seeing him, but just thought it was weird. Weird enough that she said, "We need to tell your mom," and explain to Tammy about this shadowy figure. Tammy said, "Did you really see him?" And Janet said, "Yes, I thought I saw a man." Tammy's like, "Oh, okay." So they went inside and told Tammy's mother, and at first Tammy's mother seemed to take the story seriously. She went outside to investigate and saw that nobody was there, and she accused Janet of lying. She said, "You're making up stories. It's just your imagination." Now this confused Janet. She didn't think she'd made up this story, but Janet's home life was so full of turmoil. She had learned to repress the memories of the abuse around her, and these new experiences created so many questions, but she had no support, so she really had only herself to rely on. Now, the encounter with this monster boy, who she would of course later realize was a typical gray ET, became something she thought about every day. She hadn't made any connection to UFOs or extraterrestrials, but she did feel that there was more to the encounter than she could remember. As Janet says, "I did leave there with the knowing that they told me something or gave me info of some kind. I just can't remember what it is. And it really makes me wonder all the time what it is." Janet is now very confident that she did encounter this other strange humanoid. She doesn't know if it was non-human or what, but she absolutely does believe it was related to all of this. And again, very difficult for her to process. She had nobody to talk to. Janet's childhood was quite lonely. Her father was very abusive. He didn't allow friends over. She often spent her time outside or over at her friend Tammy's house just to avoid going home. And to complicate the issue, Janet didn't really feel part of the family because she was in fact adopted. She was kind of considered the weird one. Her younger sister was considered, the smart one, the pretty one. She was excelled at sports and was very smart, whereas Janet was a tomboy and a little bit weird. So she felt a little bit left out anyway. And then she's having all these experiences. And as she came to awareness of all this, she started to look back at some other weird events, because it wasn't just these two humanoid encounters. There were a few other weird events in her childhood, which she absolutely believes are connected to all of this. Looking back on her life, there were a few events that definitely stood out. For example, one evening about 1 year before the quote monster boy encounter, Janet had just entered her bedroom and climbed into bed when she was startled by a brilliant illumination shining in through the window from the backyard. Now this couldn't have been a car or anything. There was no road back there. But this light was as bright as a searchlight. It wasn't a helicopter because there was no noise, and Janet got up to investigate, but doesn't remember anything other than that. fact, she didn't remember the incident until years later, when she was beginning to put the pieces together about her encounters with these weird humanoids. Another incident occurred around age 9 one morning. Janet, her sister, and her mother were in the kitchen eating breakfast. Janet's father had just left for work when, without warning, the door to the garage began to shake, as though someone was trying to get in but couldn't turn the handle. As Janet says, "That door started to shake like nothing I've ever seen before. It just shook. I mean, that door shook. We had never had anything like that again, just that one time." Following these weird events, Janet just tried to forget about them. She put them away in the back of her mind and didn't think too much about it. She knew she had seen something unusual, but with no way to interpret it or to process it, she just tried to forget about it. And time moved on, and in 1972, Janet's family sold the house on Wells Drive in Tarzana and decided to buy a much larger house in Woodland Hills. This was a huge house with many rooms, a billiard room, it had a den. It was a very expensive house. However, this brought another complication, because as it turned out, this house was badly haunted, and Janet started to experience a huge variety of paranormal events. And in fact, so did the entire family. The first night they moved into this new house, weird things started to happen. For example, the electricity hadn't been turned on yet, but the vacuum cleaner kept turning on by itself. And as the days and weeks passed, other strange things happened. There were strange sounds echoing through the house, phantom footsteps, weird knocking noises. They heard disembodied voices. The piano would play by itself. They turned on the radio, it would change channels. Light bulbs would burst mysteriously. They even saw apparitions appearing and disappearing, lights going on and off, doors opening and closing, all kinds of activity. At first, everyone tried to ignore and explain this away, but it occurred so frequently. There were so many manifestations with so many witnesses, it was impossible to deny. I mean, the car keys would disappear. Objects would move by themselves. They felt weird cold spots coming and going. Once Janet's sister saw an apparition at the top of the staircase. A lot of the activity seemed to center around the stairs. One evening, 1973, this was 1 year after moving in, Janet unfortunately came home shortly past curfew, and when she walked in, her abusive father was waiting for her behind the door, and Janet received the worst beating of her life. Moments later, her father came into her bedroom to apologize, but Janet had reached a point where she wasn't going to take any more abuse. She found the courage to fight back. She rejected his apology and harshly berated him for how he had treated her so badly for so many years. She knew that this could very likely provoke him into another beating, but at that point she didn't even care. She let him know in no uncertain terms that she was sick of it and wasn't going to take it anymore. It was 1 week later, her father was driving on the freeway and died of a massive heart attack. This was of course tragic, but for the first time Janet was in control of her own life. She was no longer being abused. She was finally allowed to bring friends over, and as the time passed, she and her mother became much closer. Janet started dating. Her entire life improved a lot. Her mother started dating and found another man to marry. But this haunting continued, and Janet could not have friends over because usually something would happen. And one day in 1974, she invited a boy that she thought was really cute over for a date and told him to wait in the den while she got ready. And when she came back downstairs, she saw that every light in the room had been switched on and her boyfriend looked white as a sheet. And he said, "Get me out of this house. Get me out of this house." He was clearly scared. So Janet said, "Okay, let's go." And she led him outside, and he explained that he got up and was walking to one of the doorways, and this large glowing orb appeared and blocked his way. He went to another door, and this orb zipped over and stopped him. There was a lot of doors in the den, and each time he approached one of these doors, this orb stopped him. So this was very upsetting for him. He refused to go on the date. Janet never saw him again. And this was something Janet had to deal with, because anytime she invited someone over, she would never see them again because something would happen. So this was so bad, just so much activity, that finally Janet's mother sought help, and in 1976 she called the parapsychology department at UCLA, and they sent over Dr. Thelma Moss to research their case. Thelma Moss was very familiar with poltergeist-like activity, and she concluded that the activity was real and that the cause was probably Janet herself. Of course, Janet wasn't happy to hear this, nor did she entirely agree, but once again, she was the odd girl out, the weird one. So time marched on. Around 1978, Janet found a job as a waitress in a restaurant. She had a serious boyfriend. At age 19, she and her boyfriend got married and made plans to move out. They found an apartment and were packing up their belongings. And on the day she was moving out, her mother was crying in the kitchen while Janet and her boyfriend were carrying boxes outside. Janet's boyfriend went upstairs to get the last box while she went into the kitchen to comfort her mother and say goodbye. And her boyfriend did not come back, so she became concerned. She walked into the foyer and saw him sitting at the bottom of the stairs, pale and shaking his head. And he's like, "Let's go, hurry." And she's like, "What's wrong?" And he said that while he was carrying the last box about halfway down the stairs, a sudden blast of freezing cold air enveloped him, and he became momentarily paralyzed. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak, he could barely breathe. And finally it passed through him, and he collapsed at the bottom of the stairs, weak and disoriented. Living in that haunted house was very difficult for Janet, and she was very glad to get out of there. It was very difficult not only with the haunting activity, but because it basically centered around her. And it could very well be, like Thelma Moss says, that she, in fact, was the cause of these events. Because researchers have noticed a pattern. When there is a disturbed, often teenager in the house, this can cause a lot of poltergeist-like activity. And having interviewed quite a few contactees, many of them will come back from an encounter and have this kind of activity. So I'm not so sure it's a ghost. I think it might be a person's bioelectric field or their psychic abilities becoming suddenly enhanced, and all of this stuff starts happening. At any rate, it was very difficult for Janet. Very glad to move out of that house, but it wasn't long, 1 year later, that there was another issue that came up which was very difficult for her. Out of the blue, Janet was diagnosed with Graves' disease. This was very difficult for her. There was no history of this in her family, she would later discover. So she ended up having to have some radioactive iodine treatments. She did well, she responded great, so that was good. But then other things started to happen. One day she was out at a pool, just enjoying her life with her husband and some friends, when suddenly she felt very weak, very disoriented. She couldn't catch her breath. They rushed her off to the hospital. Good thing they did. The hospital had a very hard time diagnosing her. But Janet ended up having a dramatic near-death experience and also experienced some other very unusual events that she could not explain, still can't explain to this day. So now at the hospital, Janet felt paralysis and numbness along the right side of her body. She was pale, sweaty, nauseous. She found she couldn't even speak. The doctors were doing all kinds of tests on her. They could not figure it out. They thought she might have heat stroke, but they weren't sure. And they weren't even sure if she would survive the night. They told her family to quickly go home, get something to eat, change some clothes, and that they would have to move Janet to another hospital. For the next 24 hours, Janet felt herself slipping in and out of consciousness. At one point she woke up in what she believes was an ambulance, but she was amazed to see this man sitting next to her. And she says he looked almost angelic. He looked perfect, and she was absolutely captivated by his appearance because an intensely bright white light shone down on her from above, only on Janet, but the entire area seemed to glow and was so bright. The man put his hand on Janet's arm and, speaking to her in soft, calm tones, started to assure her that everything would be fine and that she was okay. And Janet calmed down as she says, "I felt I could believe him, and I had a feeling of being safe with him, though he was emotionless at the same time. He was the most beautiful man I had ever laid eyes on. He was what you would say godlike. He was so perfectly beautiful." Now in hindsight, Janet wondered, could he have been an angel? Maybe even an ET? She really isn't sure, but this intensely bright white light made her wonder if perhaps she had had a near-death experience. And she tried to investigate this trip to the hospital, but there was no record of it. There was no information whatsoever about any of this. Janet ended up spending many days in the hospital while her family waited to see if she would live or die. But Janet hung in there, and her condition started to improve. She regained her speech. She could understand what was going on. There was a lot more tests, angiograms, and finally the diagnosis came in, and the doctors couldn't believe it. They said that Janet had a cerebral aneurysm, a stroke. They were really baffled. They had never seen a patient so young and healthy, suffering from a major stroke for no apparent reason. But yeah, she had a total occlusion of the left carotid artery. Thankfully, Janet rallied. Her condition slowly stabilized, but she definitely had some damage. The right side of her body was paralyzed, and the doctor said that there was not a whole lot they could do, but due to her improvement and young age, they decided to send her home for physical therapy and just regularly monitor her condition. And meanwhile, strange events began to occur. While waiting in the hospital to be discharged, she says someone came into her room and wheeled her out for some more tests, and Janet found herself lying on this table with a thin white sheet over her body. It was a narrow room with white walls, very quiet, and looking at her surroundings, she saw that one entire wall was covered from floor to ceiling with dials, buttons, switches, and monitors. There was a man dressed in a white doctor's coat in the corner, busy with all this equipment. Janet eventually found an image that approximates what she saw. You can see it here. She asked this man repeatedly for information, but he totally ignored her. He did come over once to check on her, but never spoke to her. It was very strange. There were no nurses coming in or out to explain what was happening, which usually happened during her entire stay. There was just this one man, and she began to wonder if he even knew she was there. She could actually feel the heat from all this strange equipment. And yet, they weren't really doing any tests to her at all. It was all very strange. So later, she investigated this and found out that there really was no record of any such room in the hospital. And she tried to talk about it, but once again, Janet was accused of imagining things. So Janet went home and began to recover from her stroke. And thankfully, her recovery went really well. She started to get back to normal fairly quickly, though she was bedridden for months. And more weird events occurred. A friend introduced her to a gentleman by the name of Brian. And Brian was kind of a mysterious figure in Janet's life. He showed up and was immediately very attentive and nurturing to her, really helped her through her recovery. And she did not know this guy. He was a little bit vague about who he was and where he came from. He never had a car, would just show up, did not tell her where he lived, even though she asked him. Her husband was a pretty jealous guy. He never showed any jealousy. This guy didn't show any romantic interest in Janet, just wanted to help her recover. She was very curious about why he was so friendly and nurturing to her. One day he gave her a book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy, Ph.D. And he told her basically, I have it on good authority. If you follow what it says to the letter every night, you can heal yourself. And he was very emphatic about this. And Janet listened to him and read the book and did what it said. And her recovery was amazing. In fact, she had to go regularly to the doctors for angiograms, a very painful process. She went back after reading this book and doing the instructions, and the doctors were utterly astonished. They could not find any sign of her stroke at all. And they told her this is not possible. There's always signs and symptoms. We can tell. They could not tell that she had ever had a problem. They did tell her that because of this stroke, she should not get pregnant and should take very careful precautions to never get pregnant because it could be very dangerous for her. At the time, she and her husband were trying to get pregnant, but unsuccessfully, so they didn't really pay too much attention to all of this. Still more high strangeness going on because every now and then, Janet would see UFOs. These were mostly distant lights in the sky, usually at night, and she thought everybody was seeing these. She did not really think of them too much. She just thought, well, I guess there's unexplained things up there. She didn't really connect it to her own experiences. This time, she's not really thinking about that encounter at age 10. She certainly didn't think it was a gray alien or anything like that. But yeah, she started having all these UFO encounters. And then one evening, while driving with her husband and her sister's kids, her babies, she had a very dramatic missing time encounter. And this one changed everything. It was 1985. Janet and her husband were driving to his parents' home in Canyon Country. At that time, this was a pretty remote desert area just north of Los Angeles. With them were Janet's sisters, 2 babies. Janet and her husband were babysitting them because they didn't know if they were ever going to be able to have kids themselves. So this was a remote area at the end of a couple of dirt roads. There were no other houses around, no traffic lights, really no traffic at all. They left for home around 9 p.m. and were about a quarter of a mile from the house when the car mysteriously died. Now, Janet's husband was a professional mechanic, and he opened the hood and couldn't find anything wrong with the car. So he told Janet to just wait there in the car with the babies, and he would walk the quarter mile back home and get help. Janet, of course, had no choice but to agree, and as soon as her husband left, something strange happened. As Janet says, all of a sudden, I was terrified. I was so afraid that aliens or somebody from space was going to come down and get us that I was making myself sick. I was so afraid. I can't even tell you the emotion of the fear that I had. I was so obsessively terrified, I could not stop looking out the windows to see if anything was coming. My common sense kept saying, "Don't be so ridiculous and stupid. There's nothing to be afraid of." But I couldn't overcome the intense fear. And that's the last thing Janet recalls. Her next memory is of being on the 14 freeway driving home. She had zero memory of her husband arriving, the car being fixed, or anything. And for some reason, she never thought to bring it up again. It became just another strange incident in her life that had no explanation. Even then, the idea that she was being visited by UFOs or ETs never really entered her mind. So following this missing time encounter, the bridge that Janet and her husband had never expected to cross came. Janet was pregnant. And in fact, she thinks she got pregnant on that night. So this was a big deal. Her husband really wanted her to get an abortion. She refused. She wanted to carry this baby. Doctors were really upset about it, and finally they agreed, as long as Janet allowed herself to be monitored very carefully and would concede to having a cesarean section. Janet agreed, and the pregnancy progressed. It was not easy for her. It was a very difficult pregnancy. She had very severe morning sickness. It was also around this time she discovered what appears to be an implant in her mouth, a little hard lump on the side of her cheek. She wanted to get it removed. She showed it to the doctor, and the doctor was like, I think we should just let this slide by for now. But it really bothered her, and she started to really wonder about it as well. But she gave birth to a very healthy, happy baby girl. It was a very wonderful time in her life, other than she and her husband started to experience some friction, and ultimately they would end up with a separation and a divorce. Interestingly, her child would start to sleepwalk. They'd find her outside sometimes. And later, it appears that her child was also having experiences. But with the divorce going on, Janet ended up moving back into her mother's house, this haunted house. And it turns out that her mother was also very, very sick. She was suffering from dementia, also had severe heart problems, and her health was failing fast. So Janet found herself not only caring for a very young child, but her ailing mother. And it was so difficult for her. In fact, she was a little bit overwhelmed. It was around this time that she had an amazing angelic encounter, an encounter with an angel that really helped her through this very trying time. This was probably the most difficult period of Janet's life so far. With her ailing mother and her young daughter, she was just overwhelmed. And one evening, after fixing a meal for her mother and putting her to bed, Janet went downstairs with her little dog, ate some food, and then cleaned up and closed up the kitchen. She was preparing to go back upstairs for the night. She opened the kitchen door and with her dog stepped into the high-ceilinged foyer in front of the staircase. But as soon as she turned and made a step towards the staircase, both Janet and her dog stopped to avoid what appeared to be a person. But looking up, she could see clearly this was not a person. Instead, it was an enormous apparition composed of glowing, silvery white light, just standing there, towering almost 15-20 feet high to the very top of the high ceilings. So Janet immediately took a step backwards, stared up, and thought to herself, "What am I seeing?" And as Janet says, it was a giant angel right in front of me. She was cloudy, but I could see what it was. It was an angel. She was huge. It just took up the whole area. It stayed there right in front of me for about a minute while my dog was scared, trying to cautiously bark at it. It was looking down at me and looking around as well. So Janet was stunned. She wasn't really religious, had certainly never given much thought to angels. There was no mistaking it. She could even see what looked like wings, though they weren't sharply defined and looked like a bright aura surrounding this figure. But this angel remained there, glowing for a full minute or even two. She could feel the sheer power of its presence and could feel a kind of quiet and gentle vibration coming from it. She had the sense that it wanted to be seen. So she just stood there in stunned silence, watching it. And her dog saw it too, so she knew she wasn't imagining it. And in fact, as it hovered there, Janet got the distinct feeling that it was sending her a message. And the message was that there were going to be big changes coming in her life. As Janet says, "I knew things were going to change. I knew something was going to happen." And it did. It got terrible. And in the end, my mother died. As you can imagine, that was a very, very difficult for Janet. But she got through it. And time passed, her daughter grew up, and things started to slowly settle back to normal, at least for a little while. One day, in around 1990, Janet was driving up to Washington to pick up her daughter who was visiting there, and somehow got to her destination far quicker, hours earlier than she should have. She had added time. And this time she was able to confirm it, because this sort of thing had happened a few times to her, and she kind of just wrote it off. Like, I must have not looked at the clock correctly. I don't know what's going on here. But on this occasion, there was no way she could have arrived as early as she did. So that was very confusing to her, and she really wondered about it. Because missing time is one thing, but added time is a different ballgame. Very hard to explain. So Janet also found herself suffering from all kinds of strange health problems, allergies of all different kinds. She had situational vertigo. She had chemical sensitivities. All kinds of really weird and unusual health problems plagued her. So this was more difficult things that she had to deal with. Her doctors really had no answers. They did not know what was causing it. So this was another weird complication in her life, which she began to realize was just not going to be a normal life. It wasn't long after this that Janet was driving through the desert one evening, and had a very dramatic UFO encounter. This was her first real dramatic, undeniable UFO sighting. It was 2005, and Janet was driving alone through Victorville in the Southern California desert. She preferred to drive late at night because it was much cooler and there was far less traffic. She was driving well over the speed limit and looking through the rear view mirror, and this is when she was surprised and somewhat alarmed to see red, blue, and white lights behind her. But it was strange, because these lights seemed to be circulating rapidly and swooping down from above at a very high rate of speed. And not only that, they appeared from quite a distance, and yet were approaching so fast that she actually feared a collision. And she thought, could this be the police? Is this an ambulance or an emergency vehicle? What is going on? So in her haste and panic to pull over, she nearly lost control of the car. But the lights then swooped directly over her car, almost buzzing it, and then completely disappeared. She did get a quick glimpse of what appeared to be a, quote, large, smooth, and rounded disc. It flew upward and over her car, leaving her badly shaken. And only then did she realize that there was no siren, no engine noise, no sound whatsoever coming from this thing. As Janet says, I had no idea what the hell was happening. It freaked me out because there was no one there, and it was gone as fast as it came. So was it a UFO? In all the abrupt confusion, Janet honestly didn't think so at first, but it was only after she thought about it, remembered exactly what she saw, realized how strange it was, that she really began to wonder about it. And after reviewing the event, she became 100% convinced that this was a genuine UFO. And also strange was that once again, she arrived home an hour earlier than she should have. She had kept a very careful track of time, so there was no mistaking this. That UFO encounter was a huge wake-up call for Janet. She tried to explain it away as an emergency vehicle, but it made no sense. This thing went over her car. She saw the disc shape. She really wanted to explain it away, but she just couldn't. And this really got her thinking about her past and the many strange events she'd experienced. And then one day she was watching TV, and guess what? A show about gray ETs comes on. This was around 2013. And seeing the images of gray aliens on the TV screen nearly knocked her to the floor, because there was an image there that was almost identical to this, quote, monster boy that she had seen as a child. So she knew then and there that what had happened to her. And she realized, oh my gosh, I am having contact with ETs. The missing time, all of the UFO sightings, the face-to-face encounters with humanoids, all of it suddenly made sense. So she ended up contacting MUFON. She submitted a report, and she started thinking about maybe going under regressive hypnosis. But meanwhile, she had this ET implant, or what she thought was some weird foreign body, in her mouth. And hearing about implants, she wondered about it. And she decided, this is really bothering me. I think I'm going to have this looked at. I'm going to see if I can have this removed. So this turned out to be another chapter of high strangeness in Janet's life. This weird object in her mouth had bothered her for years. So Janet finally decided to take action. She went to a doctor who told her that he would be unable to remove it and that she would have to visit an oral surgeon. So Janet made an appointment with a surgeon. There were more x-rays and testing, and the surgeon agreed that this was a foreign body and he would remove it. He says he could not identify it, and Janet knew that this object was strange because it had no right being there. So she gave the surgeon very explicit instructions on what to do with this object. As she told him, listen, whatever thing you take out of my mouth, I want you to keep it. If there's something in there, anything, I want you to keep it. Send it to a lab to have it tested, but I want that specimen to come back to me. So the doctor agreed. The surgery went smoothly. The object was removed. Janet received 3 stitches, and afterwards, sure enough, he gave her the object in a small vial filled with liquid. And as they both suspected, the object, whatever it was in fact metallic. The surgeon did not say what kind of metal. Janet does still have it in her possession, but has yet to have it tested. She was just happy to finally have it removed. Janet was very relieved to get that object out of her body. To this day, she's still somewhat ambivalent about it, but she does feel like this is very possibly an ET implant. Also, one thing I should mention, Janet says that she was having weird beeping-like tones in her head. This is something quite a few contactees report. It's not tinnitus. This is something else. Possibly implants. There does seem to be a connection here. At any rate, this was something she was also experiencing. But now, following this, she decided it was time. She was going to go under hypnosis. She contacted a very well-known hypnotherapist who specializes in this sort of thing and had herself regressed to her encounter at age 10. And she found out that, yes, this was more than she consciously remembered. She didn't remember a whole lot more than seeing this gray ET in the red button-down plaid shirt and blue jeans on a bike, but she remembered some, and yeah, it looks like she was taken on board. She did see more ETs as well. So this hypnotic regression was a big step forward in understanding her experiences. Going under hypnotic regression was a turning point for Janet. She was finally facing the fact that she'd had encounters. She was very curious to find out if she could remember anything else during her encounter with this little alien boy. So she was taken back to that time, and she cried openly under hypnosis as she recalled being taken to what seemed to be a cloudy white area. This little gray alien boy was with her, reassuring her, while 2 other beings stood by her. They both wore cloaks and were looking kind of away from her. One of the beings she sensed wanted to take her, but the other did not. And meanwhile, the gray who had brought her there just kind of stood by while the other 2 debated. This is what she recalled. And as Janet says, I don't remember whatever they might have said or done, but they told me something. They told me something before I came back, and for the life of me, I just can't quite remember what they told me. One of the most surprising things to me, I actually did not want to leave him when it was my time to go back on my bike. I was crying, if you can believe it. I can't explain it. I was so torn. When I was going back, I wanted to stay with him. I'm going to be talking about that for the rest of my life. I miss him very much. And to this day, if you told me he was outside, I would go out there and talk to him, be with him. So now there was no denying it. Janet knew she was a contactee. It was the only explanation for what she had experienced at that young age and throughout her life. And there was no choice but to accept the fact that she was a contactee. And the fact was she still felt connected to this little gray alien boy. Sometimes she would get little telepathic communications, and as time went on, this would become even more pronounced. But in 2016, Janet decided that she was going to move to Texas. She had a new boyfriend, and they were living there in a little trailer. This was a difficult time for her. Their finances were not great, but this is when she had what she first thought was a dream about being on board a UFO. But when she woke up, she had absolute physical evidence that this was not a dream. So yeah, she had another onboard UFO encounter, and this was followed very shortly by yet another. So yeah, 2 more onboard encounters, once again confirming that Janet is a contactee. So in this first dream, what Janet thought was a dream, Janet found herself sitting in a chair, very much like a dentist's chair or an old-fashioned barber chair. Behind her stood 3 or 4 grays. She said they had sharp, angular faces, a little different from the alien boy she had encountered as a child. And as Janet says, they were all looking straight down my throat, like way down to my stomach. They inserted an apparatus for a clear path all the way down. I remember no pain or discomfort, just dismay about what was happening. It wasn't a bad thing. I was just sort of stunned. I don't know what they did. Now, although she initially thought this might be a dream, Janet now believes wholeheartedly that this was a real experience because upon awakening, she discovered a strange, orange-colored residue on her neck. She was horrified. She quickly rushed to the bathroom to scrub herself clean. She felt an incredible urgency to get this substance off of her body, and this was no easy task. It was dry, it was crusty, it was about 3.5 inches long. It looked to her almost like a finger had smeared it on her neck. But she really wanted to get it off, perhaps because it was proof that this dream wasn't a dream at all. So while this experience was traumatic, she quickly had reasons to feel positive about it. Because as Janet says, the very next day was the beginning of all my health changes for the better. After this is when I was in communication with them. They were coaching me what to do to help myself, and it has all worked out well. It was around that time that Janet did have another vivid UFO, quote, dream, but again, she believes it was probably a real experience, another onboard encounter. Again, she found herself sitting in this same chair as before, unable to move. Surrounding her was a cloudy, milky whiteness. She was alone at first, but momentarily a gray showed up, and he was holding a large needle. As Janet says, the needle was huge. It was long and it was huge, and I was so scared. I screamed and pleaded, "Don't do this! You can't do this! You are not allowed to do this to me!" He did not hear me. He did not care. He came straight forward from across the room, and he was not stopping. It was going to happen, and he just put that needle in my arm, and I passed out, and I don't remember anything. It was bad. I didn't like it. So those two onboard encounters were not positive for her. She felt these were negative experiences. But she does admit that following these encounters, her life changed dramatically for the better. Her health stabilized. She started to get a lot more communication from the ETs, who she felt were actually guiding her with her health problems. She left her boyfriend, moved back to California, found another gentleman, had built a relationship with him, which turned out to be a wonderful relationship. He treated her very kindly. They were able to get a job that was both rewarding and lucrative. So her life changed around completely. She was very, very happy. And now she had the time to really look into her past. And being adopted, she was always very curious about where she came from. What about her genetics? So she had her genetics done. She started looking into her background, and she got some incredible, shocking surprises when she did this. She found out she was a twin. She found out that her genetic history is very, very unusual and has a lot of unexplained things surrounding it. So once again, Janet found herself embroiled in high strangeness, and each time she had some questions answered, it would just bring more questions. So this was really a lifelong search for answers for Janet, and this is where she is today. She's still searching for answers, but this is how Janet feels about her encounters currently. Investigating her past, it was opening a can of worms, because the first weird thing that Janet found out was that her birth certificate had no hospital listed. And every effort she made to find more information just led to more excuses and denials. And then she found out about her biological father, and it was a huge shock, because it turned out that he had sired somewhere between 50 and 100 children. And in fact, he had been arrested for bigamy and was selling babies. He escaped prison. He has yet to be located. By now, he has probably passed away. But that was an incredible shock. Janet's ancestry also revealed some other surprises. She learned that she has direct relations to two royal lines in Europe, both in France and England. And as Janet says, "Here's the thing. Nothing in my life has ever been normal. I just can't be normal. I can't have a normal story." So despite all the drama and high strangeness, Janet feels overall that her experiences have been positive. She does wonder if her thyroid problems were connected in some way to her UFO encounters with possible radiation exposure, though she has no direct evidence of this. But given that nobody else in her family history reports any thyroid problems, she can't rule it out. It was around this time that Janet finally found more relief for her many health problems when she began meditating and communicating telepathically with what she calls her, quote, ET friends. She has come to look upon them almost as her guides. But this was a very long journey. It was one that reminded her again how unusual her life path has been. Following her encounters in Texas, her health problems did improve dramatically. So if her health problems were in any way attributable to her encounters, she is very grateful that steps were taken to help and heal her. Janet also noticed a sharp increase in her psychic abilities. All her life, she has had very strong intuition, including mediumship abilities. On a number of occasions, she would receive very clear messages from the deceased loved ones of people around her, even complete strangers. Usually, messages would come to her when someone near her had lost a child, and on each occasion, Janet would relay the information, stunning the recipient with the accuracy of her information and sometimes moving them to tears. Janet also reports a strong connection to animals of all kinds, especially horses. In fact, a few have given her great accolades with this. Many strange experiences continued. Janet's daughter also reports very strong psychic abilities of many kinds. Once, the two of them shared a dream of going into space with a weird man in some kind of elevator. At least they think it was a dream. On another occasion, Janet had a spontaneous out-of-body experience where she found herself being catapulted out of Earth's atmosphere, zipping through the stars, and appearing in a completely different time and place. More recently, this is in 2023, she narrowly avoided a serious auto accident solely by a very powerful, intuitive premonition. So Janet does have some final words about her experiences and what they mean to her. As Janet says, "I feel like it's just a part of my life. They do communicate with me regularly and have for about the past 6 years or so. I'm able to ask questions or request information on certain things. I get about 80% answered. I ask them straight up and get most answers in the wee hours, between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. I do have health issues, and they help me with that. It's really amazing. I feel like I have them in my corner, ready and wanting to give me the information I seek. I now believe they have been with me always. In the end, I will leave you with this. I miss the boy very much and think of him often. I feel in some way that we are part of each other. I still hope to see him again one day." So that is the story of Janet's lifelong experiences, not only with UFOs and extraterrestrials, but all kinds of high strangeness, paranormal and psychic events of all kinds. Janet is still in contact with these grays. Ultimately, she feels, as she says, that this has been a benevolent and positive experience. A mixed bag, certainly, at first. But I think Janet's experiences and her account is a really good example of what it's like to sort of go through this sort of experience. What can start out as very confusing, very scary, ultimately leads the person on a pathway towards healing, wisdom, enlightenment, and understanding. She certainly believes she's had a spiritual awakening as a result of all of this. And as she says, she would very much like to meet this gray alien boy again, which, could very well happen. As we do know, this is, for most contactees, not a one-off. It's something that they experience throughout the entirety of their lives. And that certainly seems to be true in Janet's case. So I do want to give Janet a huge thank you for allowing me to interview her and share her experiences with a much wider audience. Again, this should be considered a summary of her experiences. If you want to check out her whole story, do check out my book, Humanoids in High Strangeness, 20 True UFO Encounters. Janet has a whole chapter about her experiences, and of course there are many other people in the book who've experienced similar events. What an unusual contact story. I mean, that gray alien boy on a bicycle, I've never heard anything quite like it. I will say I have several accounts of people who have seen grays dressed up in human clothes. You know, whether it's a tuxedo suit. Whitley Strieber described that. Another lady told me the same thing. Or in shirts or pants or what have you. So that to me is a very interesting aspect. And again, I think this little gray alien was just trying to make Janet a little more comfortable with his appearance. Amazing. So there you go, guys. I truly appreciate you guys watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Maybe learned something. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. And yeah, keep having fun. I really think that's why we're here. All right. Till next time, guys. I will see you later. Bye for now.